Good afternoon, everyone. Should we start? So, today we are going to discuss fetal growth restriction. What is fetal growth restriction? Do you have any idea? Yes? When a fetus fails to attain the potential, genetically determined potential growth within the intrauterine cavity, that is known as the fetal growth restriction. Now, how can we differentiate between the two, whether it is the intrauterine growth restriction or it is the small for gestational age baby? What is small for gestational age? Yes? What is small for gestational age? Small for gestational age, when the estimated birth weight of the baby is below the 10th percentile of that corresponding gestational age, the difference between the two, intrauterine growth restriction, is also means when baby fails to attain the genetically determined growth and it is below the 10th percentile. Then what is the difference between the two? The difference is in IUGR, there is some pathology behind the growth restriction, but in small for gestational age babies, it is constitutional. It depends upon the parent's height and weight. So it is determined genetically. There is no pathology. This is the definition. So IUGR is a condition where fetus fails to achieve its genetically determined growth potential and the birth weight is below the 10th percentile of its gestational age and there is some pathology behind the process. Small for gestational age means when the estimated fetal weight or the abdominal circumference which is determined on the ultrasound is less than the 10th percentile, but there is no pathology behind it. That is why it is also known as the constitutionally small baby, because the parent's height and as well as the weight is smaller. Now, what is the incidence of small for gestational age or IUGR baby? The incidence, if we see in IUGR, it is 3 to 5% of all pregnancies, but overall incidence in India, it is 15 to 25%, out of which 50% is more due to the IUGR. And 20% of the stillbirths, babies who die within the womb, 20% of them is because of the intrauterine growth restriction. And only 20 to 30% of the restricted fetuses are small because, anyway, we'll try to read like this. So only 20 to 30% of the growth restricted fetuses are because of the pathological growth restriction. So just remember 3 to 5% of all pregnancies have IUGR, out of which 20 to 30% are because of the IUGR and 20% are lead to the stillbirth and 20 to 30% are because of the pathological processes. Now classification, if we see, how can we classify these IUGR babies? It depends upon the period of gestation. In the first trimester, the growth is not affected by the placental function because the first trimester, it is the whole entire fetus depends upon the corpus luteum. Once the placental function is established, the structure and function is established, then only it becomes dependent upon the placenta, which occurs early in the second trimester. So the intrauterine growth restriction starts either in the second trimester, early second trimester, or late third trimester. If it starts early in the second trimester, that means it is early IUGR. If it is late in the third trimester, that means after 32 weeks, then we call it as the late IUGR. The difference between the two is that if it is early IUGR, the whole body is equally affected and it is the symmetrical IUGR. And it occurs after 32 weeks, that means later in the pregnancy, there is asymmetrical IUGR. The head is of normal size, but the rest of the body suffers. This is known as the brain sparing effect. Why it occurs, that we'll discuss later. So the classification, if we classify them, there are either early onset or late onset. Early onset may be symmetrical and late onset is asymmetrical. And one more is the constitutional, in which there is no pathology, which is genetically determined. So the early fetal growth restriction that occurs from the second trimester onwards, it is severe in nature because it starts very early, before 32 weeks of gestation, and there is early deterioration of all the viscera of all the organs. But if it starts later, which is more common, after 32 weeks, it occurs in 70% of the cases, the gestational age after 32 weeks, there should be, we have to rule out the absence of congenital abnormalities before we label this patient that she has IUGR. But this is more dangerous because the late deterioration can lead to unexpected stillbirth. So if we compare the two, symmetrical, which is also known as the early onset, with asymmetrical, which is also known as the late onset IUGR, the difference between the two is in symmetrical, the baby, it will be uniformly small, but in asymmetrical, the head will be larger than abdomen because of the brain sparing effect. Then if we calculate the ponderal index, which is the birth weight ratio or relation of the birth weight with crown rump length, it will be normal in symmetrical because it is symmetrical. The body as well as the head will be of the same constitution. But in asymmetrical, in which the head is spared, it will be elevated. Ponderal index will be elevated. And if we see the head circumference, abdominal circumference, or the female rank ratios, they will be normal in symmetrical IUGR, but they will be elevated in asymmetrical IUGR. Etiology, if we see in symmetrical, it is usually either the genetic diseases or because of the infection. But in asymmetrical, which occurs later in the pregnancy after 32 weeks, it is because of the placental dysfunction. That is why it is more detrimental to the fetus as compared to the symmetrical IUGR. The total number of cells, they are less in symmetrical IUGR, but the cell size is normal. But in asymmetrical, the number of cells is normal and the cells are smaller. It is reverse. And the neonatal course, the prognosis in symmetrical IUGR is good as compared to the asymmetrical IUGR. They have poor prognosis. Now, etiology. What causes this IUGR? It could be either maternal cause, it could be fetal, or it could be placental, or it could be unknown. If you remember, when there is implantation, there is invasion of the trophoblast into the spiral arteries. The spiral arteries, they lose their resistance and the blood flows from high resistance to low resistance, so that blood is circulated with minimum effort to the baby. So whenever there is problem in this placental circulation, we all know that the nutrients, whether it is glucose, whether amino acids or fatty acids, or even oxygen, they are delivered by the process of diffusion. So whenever there is interference to this circulation because of increase in the resistance, the baby suffers. There will be less diffusion of these nutrients and baby suffers because of the nutrition, and there will be intrauterine growth restriction. Now, what are the diseases? What are the causes that cause this growth restriction? If we let us say with the maternal, yes, the maternal nutrition. Let us start with the age. If mother is of extremes of the age, she is a teenager, or she is more than 35, 40, elderly primigravida, or she is a teenage pregnancy she has, extremes of the age, they definitely affect the maternal nutrition, and which in turn affects the fetal nutrition. Then after the age, yes, sorry, number of pregnancies, okay, parity also affects the nutrition. Then maternal diseases like, yes, pregnancy, yes, cardiovascular diseases, pregnancy-induced hypertension, renal diseases, collagen disorders, blood disorders, blood dyscrasias, systemic lupus erythematosus. These are the maternal diseases that can affect the fetal circulation, which in turn affect the fetal nutrition. Okay, maternal causes. Then, what are the fetal causes that can cause IUGR? Yes? Very good. Congenital abnormalities. What else? Chromosomal abnormalities. Like aneuploidy, trisomies. What else? Besides congenital anomalies, besides the chromosomal abnormalities, what else? Infections, fetal infections like toxoplasmosis, yes, HIV, cytomegalovirus, herpes simplex. These are the infections which can affect the fetal nutrition and can lead to the IUGR. Then placental causes. What are the placental causes? Placenta previa, very good. What else? Abruptio placentae. What else? Placenta accreta, vasa previa, very good, excellent. Vasa previa. Then placental hemangiomas. These are the placental causes that can lead to the interfere with the fetal nutrition and can lead to the IUGR. Okay. Fetal, we have discussed like congenital abnormalities and chromosomal abnormalities like triploidy, aneuploidy, trisomies, infections like toxoplasmosis, rubella, cytomegalovirus infection, herpes simplex. Okay. Placental, poor uterine blood flow to the placenta for a long time, which occurs in the pregnancy-induced hypertension, which leads to the placental inefficiency and inadequate transfer of nutrients to the fetus, and then placental pathology like abruptio placenta, accidental hemorrhage, circumvallate placenta, vasa previa, and placenta accreta. These are the causes that can lead to the impaired placental function. There are certain drugs that can cause IUGR. What are those drugs? Warfarin. Do you know what is warfarin? It is anticoagulant. Very good. Anticoagulants. Patients, those who are on the anticoagulants, those patients who have metallic valves, they are usually on the warfarin anticoagulants to prevent the thrombosis. So these patients, if they become pregnant and they are on the warfarin, there are chances that they may have intrauterine growth restriction. Then valproic acid. What is valproic acid? That is used for, very good, anti-epileptic drugs. And folic acid antagonists like methotrexate. These are the drugs that we have to be careful. A patient is on anticoagulants like warfarin, she is on anti-epileptics like valproic acid, or she is on folic acid antagonists like methotrexate. We have to be very careful because they may have intrauterine growth restriction if they become pregnant. Maternal conditions, as we have already discussed, cardiovascular diseases like, especially if mother has cyanotic congenital heart disease or she has chronic renal disease, these patients are prone to develop chronic hypertension or pregnancy-induced hypertension, which can interfere with the placental function and can hamper the fetal growth. Very good. Then placental function we have discussed and structural anomalies. Okay. Now there are some risk factors. What are those? Maternal age, as we have already discussed, extremes of the age, if it is a teenage pregnancy or if the mother is more than 35 to 40. Then nulliparity, social deprivation. Social deprivation if she is a neglected woman, nobody is taking care of her. Okay. Unmarried status. Usually unmarried girls, they are neglected by the parents, by the society. They are not taken care of. They suffer with the nutrition. Maternal diseases, as we have already discussed, and then extremes of the BMI. If patient is very obese or patient is very thin, these are the causes. Means BMI, if she is less than 20, her BMI is, or she has BMI more than 30, they are again prone to develop intrauterine growth restriction. Intense daily exercise, those who are working in gyms, they are doing heavy exercise, they are prone to develop the intrauterine growth restriction. And patients who have diabetes, especially with the vascular disease, they are prone to develop intrauterine growth restriction. And antiphospholipid, a patient has antiphospholipid syndrome. Now, how are we going to diagnose these patients? Number one is, if we take a proper history, from the history only, we'll come to know whether this patient is at the risk of developing IUGR or if she already has IUGR. So proper history and examination and the biophysical profile plus some investigation that we'll discuss will help us whether this patient is at the risk or she already has intrauterine growth restriction. So from the history, how are we going to calculate? How do we know that this patient has IUGR or not? See, from the history, suppose she comes to us with the amenorrhea 6 months. According to the period of amenorrhea, she should be at least 24 weeks. Now, let us say if she is only 20 weeks, that will raise the suspicion that this patient has intrauterine growth restriction. But we have to be sure whether this patient has regular periods or not, or whether she remembers her exact date of the last menstrual period. Maybe her last date is, she's not sure of her date. So we have to be sure of exact dating. When was her last LMP and whether her periods are regular or not. Because if she had irregular periods, she is having periods after every 2 months, 3 months. We don't know exactly when she conceived within these 3 months. So it is important to know the regularity and the exact dating. Now let us say patient doesn't remember, she is not sure. Then what next we do is the sonography. The only alternative we have, sonography. Sonography, what we are going to measure, we'll measure the crown rump length, CRL, from the date of conception, from early, means 6 weeks, 5 weeks to 13 weeks, we usually use the CRL, crown rump length, okay? Then after that, 15, 16 weeks onwards, we measure the head circumference. And after that, we also take the abdominal circumference, we take the biparietal diameter, and we also take the length of the femur length. These are the parameters which will tell us whether this baby is corresponding to the period of gestation or not. From that, we can calculate whether this patient has IUGR or not. Okay? Then On examination, one was the history, second is the examination. Examination will usually go for the fundal height, we will go for the baby mass, and we also see the symphysis to fundal height, from symphysis pubis to fundal height. This is measured in all patients. If there is a lag of 4 centimeters between the symphysis fundal height and the period of gestation, that suggests there is growth restriction. So, symphysis fundal height is very important. Then another parameter that gives us information is the maternal weight. Suppose a patient comes to us today, we suspect that she has a UGR. We'll ask her to come again after 2 weeks. We definitely expect that there should be increase in her weight, maternal weight gain. If it remains static even after 2 weeks, or she is dropping her fetal weight, that gives us a clue that she has intrauterine growth restriction. Okay. Then another maternal parameter by which we can find whether she has intrauterine growth restriction or not is the abdominal girth of the mother. Okay, we'll measure at every antenatal visit her abdominal girth. So from the maternal examination, we have to see the fundal height, symphysis to fundal height. Then we have to measure the maternal weight and abdominal girth, in addition to her pulse, blood pressure, general physical examination. Because now let us say she has hypertension, that will give us a clue. If she is not having intrauterine growth restriction, we'll keep this in mind. She is hypertensive, she may develop in the coming visits. Okay, these are the important things that we have to do on physical examination. Then from the history also, we have to make sure whether she has any previous history of stillbirth, any previous history of small for gestational age babies, or previous history of the preeclampsia or any cardiac disease that we have to ask from the patient. Then we go for the biometric parameters. Biometric parameters means we have to go for the ultrasound. What we are going to look at the ultrasound? Number one, as I told you, depends upon the period of gestation. If she comes before 13 weeks, we'll take the crown rump length. From 13 weeks onwards to 16 weeks, we'll take the head circumference, and 16 weeks onwards, we have multiple parameters. We take the head circumference, we take the biparietal diameter, we take the abdominal circumference of the baby, and also the femur length. From these, we'll calculate the weight and then monitor after every visit. Now, the very important thing that we have to do, suppose we have a patient who has a UGR, what we are going to measure on the ultrasound. This is known as the biophysical profile. Number one is the fetal breathing movement. We watch on ultrasonography fetal breathing movements, and then we see how many breathing movements the baby is going to make, let us say in 20 minutes. Okay, it is although a time consuming procedure, but for the sake of patient we have to do it. Suppose the baby makes one breathing movement which lasts for 30 seconds. We give it a score of 1. If there is no breathing movement in 20 minutes, or if there is one, it is less than 30 seconds, we give it a score of 0. Okay, so number one, we have to watch the baby for breathing movements at least for a period of 20 minutes, and see how many breathing movements baby is going to make and how long each breathing movement is going to last. Number two, gross body movement. Gross body movement, limb movement, upper limb movement, lower limb movement, how many movements a baby is going to make, whether baby is going to make a movement or not. Suppose there are 3 or more than three discrete moments. Three discrete moments, one moment of the right limb, one of the upper left limb, and another of the right upper limb. These are the or head movement. These are the three discrete moments. It is not that matlab babies should make three moments of the upper limb, yeah, three moments of the upper. Total we need three moments. They could be right limb, they could be left limb, they could be upper, lower, or head. Okay. So if a baby makes the body movements or limb movements in 30 minutes, we give it a score of again 1. If there is no movement, we give it a score of 0. Okay. Number third is the fetal tone. Fetal tone means if baby is flexed, then suddenly makes extension, yeah, closes the hand, flexes the leg. That means these are the movements of the flexion. That means baby is not limb. If baby is limb, dead. Although fetal heart is there, breathing movements are there, but body is not making any movement. That means the baby is toneless. So we have to watch the baby for flexion and extension. Okay, this is the fetal tone. If it is there, again we'll give it a score of 1. If there is no tone, we'll give it a score of 0. Then we also see the baby's response with each movement. What happens to the fetal heart rate when baby is, let us say, flexing the head, moving the arm, closing the hand, moving the limb? What happens to the fetal heart? Because baby is using energy to do all these things. So they suppose we'll walk, the heart rate will be more if we walk, if we are normal. Same way, there should be acceleration in the fetal heart rate. If there is increase in the heart rate in response to the fetal movement, we'll give it a score of 1. If it is absent, there is no acceleration in the fetal heart in relation to movement, we give it a score of 0. Another parameter that we have to monitor on ultrasound is the amniotic fluid volume. Okay, how many pockets are there? What is their volume? Suppose if we have 2 pockets in a perpendicular line and each pocket is more than 1 centimeter, we'll give it a score of again 1. If it is not there, there is only less than, let us say, a half centimeter pocket and there is only 1. Baby has oligohydramnios, so we'll give it a score of 0. Once we have done all these 5 parameters, that is the fetal breathing movement, gross body movement, fetal tone, reaction of the fetal heart in response to the movement, and the amniotic fluid, then we sum up this score. Okay. Now let us say baby gets a score of 8 to 10, means baby is normal, there is no problem, CNS is functioning normally, placenta is functioning normally. If it is 6, that means it is equivocal. Equivocal means it's not too bad, it is not too good either. It is equivocal if it is 6. And if it is 4 or less than 4, that means patient or baby is severe IUGR baby. Okay. So we have to, accordingly, we have to manage the baby, this patient. So interpretation, as I told you, if it is 8 to 10, that means everything is fine, placenta is fine, CNS, the central nervous system is fine, there is no asphyxia. If it is 6, there may be chronic asphyxia, but we can wait till 36 weeks and then deliver the baby. If it is 4, that means baby is not going to survive, so we have to take it out in any case. Now, besides this sonographic parameters, there are other parameters that we have to assess, like routine investigations, like to rule out the kidney dysfunction, we'll go for the kidney function tests like serum creatinine, blood urea, glomerular filtration rate, routine urine analysis. Okay. Same way, to rule out the hepatic dysfunction, we'll go for the liver function test. To rule out the anemia, we'll go for the complete blood count. To rule out the hemoglobinopathies, we'll go for the electrophoresis. To rule out the thrombocytopenic porphyria, we'll go for the coagulation profile like prothrombin time, partial thromboplastin time, bleeding time, coagulation time. So these are the routine investigations that we have to do. And in addition to this, we have to rule out if we suspect a diabetes, we have to go for the random blood sugar or fasting glucose or glucose tolerance test. If we suspect some, let us say, endocrine disorder, we have to rule out that also. We have to go for the antiphospholipid antibodies and the cardiolipin antibodies to rule out the Eplon syndrome. And in addition to this, if we want to assess the placental function, we have to know two important markers. Number one is the PAPA, that is pregnancy associated plasma protein A, which determines the function and the strength, the structure, the size of the placenta, because this is the hormone which is secreted by the placenta. If placenta is of adequate size, if placenta is functioning properly, the PAPA, which is the pregnancy associated plasma protein levels, will be within the normal range. Okay. Another important factor that we have to assess is the vascular endothelial growth factor, which also determines the angiogenesis. This is responsible for the development of capillaries and arterioles in the fetus. What is the role of these capillaries and arterioles? Yes? Sorry? It reduces the resistance. It reduces the resistance. Okay? So if there is inhibition of the angiogenesis, there will be decreased formation of the capillaries and arterioles. With the result, resistance to the blood flow will be high. So the vascular endothelial growth factor is an important determinant in uterine growth restriction. And of course, we have to go if we suspect toxoplasmosis or rubella or cytomegalovirus or herpes, we have to go for the TORCH, that is known as the TORCH test, in which we detect the antibodies to the various viruses. Then another important thing that we have to do, suppose we have a IUGR baby, we want to know the blood flow through the uterine artery, blood flow through the umbilical artery, and the blood flow through the middle cerebral artery as well as the ductus venosus. So we are going to do the Doppler study. What are we going to find in the Doppler study in uterine artery? Yes? See, the normally blood flow through the uterine arteries is 50 ml per minute. But in pregnancy, it increases to 700 ml per minute. Okay? If there is increased vascular resistance because of any reason that we have discussed so far, there will be inhibition to the flow. There may be either first to start with decrease in the flow, which is represented by a notch. So when we have a systolic wave, then diastolic wave, to start with, there will be notching. As the disease advances, there may be absent. It may be absent diastolic wave, or it may be reversed. Unfortunately, I want to show you, but this is not working. Some other day I will show you. So just remember one thing, if somebody asks what happens to the blood flow, how are we going to detect in uterine artery, just tell them there will be either notching first, after notching there will be reversal. Same is in the umbilical artery as well. So in uterine artery and the umbilical artery, we are going to measure the pulsatile index and also the resistance index. But in middle cerebral artery, usually there is no resistance. Why? Because of the effect of hypoxia, there is stimulation of the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors within the brain. Because of this acidosis, when there is hypoxia, there is accumulation of the carbon monoxide, and carbon monoxide accumulation leads to acidosis. This acidosis in turn leads to the stimulation of the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors, which in turn cause local dilatation within the brain. With the result, the blood flow to the brain is maintained. Even the whole body suffers, but because of this vasodilatation, there the blood flow to the brain is maintained. This is known as the brain sparing effect. That is why if IUGR occurs after 32 weeks, it is asymmetrical. Okay? So from Doppler ultrasound, we can stage 0, 1, 2 and 3. There are various stages of intrauterine growth restriction according to the Doppler study. At 0 stage, estimated fetal weight is less than 10th percentile, but the umbilical artery and the middle cerebral artery blood flow is normal. Okay? Weight is below the 10th percentile, but the middle cerebral artery and the umbilical artery blood flow is normal. So this is stage 0. In stage 1, again the fetal weight is below the 10th percentile, but the umbilical artery and the middle cerebral blood flow is abnormal. In stage 2, fetal weight is again below the 10th percentile, but the umbilical artery blood flow is reversed. In stage 1, there may be only notching, but in stage 2, it is reversed. And in stage 3, it may be absent. Okay? Just remember, this is the staging of IUGR according to the Doppler study. So stage 0, there is, no issue, because the blood flow in umbilical artery and middle cerebral artery is normal, although weight is below the 10th percentile. In stage 1, there is only notching. In stage 2, it is reversed, and in stage 3, it is absent. We have to deliver this baby at any case. It is not going to survive. If we take it out, even if it is premature, there are chances baby may survive. Okay? Monitoring. How are we going to monitor these patients? How often we monitor? Do we have to admit them? Can we send them home? Again, depends upon the stage, at what stage are. Suppose they have only high resistance on the Doppler study. There is no notching. There is only high resistance. We have to monitor these patients weekly. Means we have to go for the Doppler study every week. If the blood flow is reversed, we have to go it bi-weekly, means twice a week. If it is absent or it is reverse in one and absent in one artery, we have to take out the baby in any case. Okay? Now, what should be the mode of delivery in these patients? Again, it depends upon the period of gestation and the stage. Suppose we have a patient who is 36 weeks pregnancy and she has, let us say, stage 1. We can give this patient a chance to go for the vaginal delivery. But if she is in stage 2, we have to take out the baby by cesarean section. Suppose we have a patient who is only, let us say, 28 weeks pregnancy, but the stage is stage 3 or stage 2. There is hardly any chance that this baby is going to survive. So we are going to take this baby out prematurely. Only thing that we have to keep in mind, we'll give her steroids to improve the LS ratio, because these babies are prone to lung diseases. So the objective of management is to differentiate whether we have a normal, small for gestational age baby or a baby with pathological IUGR. Okay. Number two, we have to go for the Doppler study to go for the staging. Stage our patients at what stage they are, and IUGR baby, whether they need to be delivered before term or will allow them to attain the stage of viability or maturity, and also to find the cause of IUGR and treat accordingly. These are the objectives of the treatment. Now, can we prevent IUGR? So the prevention of IUGR can be, it can be prevented, yes, number one, if mother is using the recreational drugs or she is a smoker, will ask them to stop it. That can prevent. Or if we have a patient who is a high risk, we'll give her aspirin. That also can prevent the IUGR. Role of dietary modifications is not there. There is hardly any role. So the application of Doppler ultrasound, uterine artery Doppler, is just used for screening whether she has IUGR or not. Umbilical artery screening is used for the assessment whether she has small for gestational baby or she has pathological IUGR. Then middle cerebral artery Doppler studies are usually used to identify whether baby has abnormal umbilical artery Doppler study or not. And there is one more, that is the ductus venous Doppler. Ductus venosus, as you know, it is a small vein that connects the umbilical artery with the inferior vena cava. And through this ductus, the major portion of the blood is diverted to the liver. So this is also used as a parameter for identifying the stage of the IUGR. Now, what are the fetal and the neonatal complications because of IUGR? The fetal complications because of IUGR are, number one is the stillbirth, depending upon the severity of the IUGR, stillbirth. Number two, because of prematurity. Either it is a spontaneous premature delivery or it is iatrogenic. We are delivering the baby prematurely because of the unfavorable intrauterine environment. So because of prematurity, these babies are prone to various complications like intraventricular hemorrhage, pulmonary dysplasias because they are premature, their surfactant is not fully formed yet. Then necrotizing enchrolites. Then there are long-term complications that these babies are prone to, like cardiovascular abnormalities in their adulthood because of the impaired angiogenesis. These babies are prone to have myocardial infarction, heart attacks early in the adult life. They are also prone to metabolic disorders because of the increase in the insulin resistance. They are prone to develop diabetes and other dyslipidemias. And they also have neurodevelopmental abnormalities. There is abnormal development of the neuron. There is decrease in the number of neurons. There is absent myelination. With the result, these babies have thin cortex, and in the later life, they have cognitive and motor dysfunction. These are the complications that these babies are going to develop in the later life. That is why we have to monitor them. So this is the intrauterine growth restriction.